everyone, and welcome to the McGuckin Group podcast. We are thrilled today to have Dr. Stephanie Faubion join us, author of The New Rules of Menopause, a Mayo Clinic guide to perimenopause and beyond. Welcome, Dr. Faubion.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, we are thrilled to have you on for this conversation. I like to bring to the table thought leaders that can share perspective with our listeners. And here at the McGuckin Group, we work with executives, we work with managers, we work with women leaders, and this felt like there was, something that all of those listeners needed to hear. But please, let me have you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about you.
Yes, well, I'm at the Mayo Clinic, and I'm actually the chair of the Department of Medicine at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. I also am the Penny and Bill George director of the Center for Women's Health for the Mayo Enterprise. And I also am medical director for the Menopause Society. So I have a few different roles, and a couple of them are in the women's health space. My research is around menopause and sexual health.
Well, we are thrilled to have you here, and actually you're joining us at our summit here in Tampa Bay, and we could not have the conversation about closing the gender gap without having the conversation about menopause. And what I'd love just to have you kick us off with is, what are some of the latest findings and what is some of the latest research? That's a big question, but if you could break it down for our listeners, I think that would be incredible.
Sure. Well, let me go through some basics first. And let me just say the fact that we're even having a conversation about menopause is fabulous and somewhat new and different, because it wasn't that long ago where, discussions about menopause were held in back rooms and with mothers and sisters and not really out in the public. So it's really great to see that we're having these conversations in public now. Just to level set, menopause happens at a mean age of 52 in the United States, and it's defined by no menstrual period for 1 year. But we also know that that time leading up to menopause, we call it perimenopause, can also be problematic for women, and that women start to have some of the same symptoms that they experience in menopause, even 6 to 10 years before their last menstrual period. We know that hot flashes, the most common symptom of menopause, last for a mean of 7 to 9 years, but over a decade for about 1/3 of women. So these symptoms last a long time, and it's not just the hot flashes. There are also night sweats, sleep disturbance, anxiety symptoms, mood symptoms, joint aches. A whole host of issues can occur around this time frame. So women are often taken aback by, what is happening, and don't understand what their resources are and what they can do about it. So a little bit about the study that we just published recently. We looked at women in primary care at Mayo Clinic at a bunch of different sites. We sent out 33,000 surveys actually to women in primary care who are in midlife, and we got back over 5,000 surveys. And we were asking women about their symptoms and of menopause and that impact on work. So we were asking them specifically related to their menopause symptoms, were they having trouble at work? And we asked about did they reduce their hours? Did they miss days of work? Were there other adverse impacts on their work experience? And what we found was maybe not so surprising, but it was still surprising to see it on paper and in the real numbers. But 13% of women reported some adverse outcome in work related to menopause symptoms specifically. And we found that about 11% of women were actually missing days of work because of menopause symptoms. And we calculated the economic impact related to that. If you extrapolate that to the United States census data, that really means that we're losing global economy, I mean, US economy, we're losing about $1.8 billion a year just due to lost days of work. We didn't calculate any of the other things, like what if a woman didn't take a promotion or she decided to step out of the workforce altogether because of her symptoms, which I've heard some patients tell me. So I think we can estimate that the impact is actually a lot greater than that. And when you add in menopause symptom management and the medical costs associated with it, our annual costs are really in the range of about $26 billion annually. So this is not a small thing. It's not a small thing for women. It's not a small thing for their quality of life. It's not a small thing for employers, and it's not a small thing for the U.S. economy. So it's something we should be taking more seriously.
Yeah. And I love this piece that you started with, um, which is we're having the conversation, and that's new. When you and I first had the conversation, I personalized it. Nobody told me that this was how I was going to feel when I went through menopause. And, one of the biggest challenges that I experienced was brain fog.
Mm.
And the work that I do as a CEO, working with large clients like Mayo Clinic and Microsoft and many of our other clients, I need high cognitive capacity. And it was very debilitating to experience that. But I think this idea of nobody prepares us. And
Right.
if nobody's preparing women for what might be ahead, imagine the gap in preparing managers who are leading women. And imagine the gap for organizations that are employing women, and that gap is even wider.
I think you're exactly right. I think there's a huge gap, and employers don't even know what they're missing. And when you think about it, you women are at the peak of their careers at this time. They have the most knowledge, the most experience, are probably accelerating in the leadership pipeline, and all of a sudden, they're hit with these symptoms. Now, not to say that all women have a problem at this time. They don't. Some women are lucky and really just don't have any symptoms at all, but some women really do struggle. The other important thing to remember is this is not a disease. It is a universal life experience, and so we should remember that when we're talking about it, especially in terms of employment and employers and what they should be doing. This is a normal life process, and when you think about what employers should be doing, we should sort of look to, what we've learned from implementing policies about pregnancy, about lactation, because this is just another normal reproductive phase that women go through. The sticky part is that it's also associated with the aging process. And so there can be a little bit of a tie between menopause status and age. And some women actually don't want to disclose their menopause status at work because of that.
Yeah. And I think there's this, what we find when we're working with organizations is managers and CEOs want to do the right thing. They just don't know what to do. And the conversations are not quite on the table yet. And so opportunities that you and I get for conversations like this are so critical. Not only are we talking about billions of lost dollars, when we look to our mission, which is closing the gender gap, what we see is only 8% of Fortune 500 companies have women leaders as CEOs.
Mm.
That's staggering, given that we're 50% of the population. And so we're always trying to unpack, how can we create that pathway for women leaders? And so, your new book, I'm looking here at the title, The New Rules of Menopause, a Mayo Clinic guide to perimenopause and beyond. Tell us tell us the synopsis and what can people expect to see in the book, Dr. Faubion?
Well, we did this as a guide for women going through this transition, and there's a lot of misinformation that's out there about menopause, and we really wanted to make sure that women are armed with the knowledge about what may happen, and not all of these symptoms may happen, but also it's important to remember that menopause occurs around the age of 52. That means we live about one third to nearly one half of our lifespan after the menopause transition. And it's really important that we make sure that we are positioning ourselves to be healthy for the rest of our lives. And so we know that heart disease risk increases with the menopause transition. We're also at higher risk for bone loss after menopause. And as we're all aware of, that you mentioned brain fog and mental health, and we need to make sure that our brains stay healthy as we age as well. So a lot of the book talks about staying healthy after the menopause transition too. So I think women can take away that this will help them understand what's happening leading up to menopause, what's happening during the transition, and how they can position themselves to stay healthy afterwards. Because it's not about lifespan necessarily, it's really about health span. It's how many years you have that are healthy, because that's what we all want. It's quality of life. It's not so much quantity that we're looking at.
Yeah, I love that. And, I was having a conversation on the patio the other evening with my husband, and I said, I was talking to Dr. Faubion, and, the statistics are fascinating, the span of time that this can have implications for women. And, he said, as a manager that's managing women leaders, that's fascinating for me. I never knew that. I never
Right.
imagined that. And I wonder what I can do as a manager. And so, is there things that come to mind for you, Dr. Fabian, that you think this is a couple of practical things that managers can do that are managing women leaders?
This is so interesting, and I'm looking at this topic for a number of reasons. We're looking at our Mayo Clinic policy and how we're approaching this for our own employees. We're also about to do a menopause in the workplace consensus recommendation for the Menopause Society. So in a number of different venues, I'm looking at this information, and I think for managers and supervisors, first, they need to be aware that women in midlife may be experiencing this. And sometimes women go through menopause early. So it's not necessarily that the woman's going to be 50 years old, right? You could have a 35-year-old that's experiencing menopause symptoms too. But I think being available to have a conversation, not all women will want to have a conversation, so they shouldn't be forced to have the conversation. But I think managers and supervisors need some education to be able to have an informed, culturally competent discussion with women, so that they know what things that they should be looking out for. Is it more flexibility in terms of temperature control? It certainly should include access to competent care. But I also think that we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel for most businesses. And I think a lot of businesses already have established policies, for example, for mental health services. Well, some of the symptoms that occur in menopause can be mental health related, anxiety, depression. So it's not that we need to create a new pathway for women necessarily. It's that we need to understand how to tap into existing resources. Now, we may need to make sure that managers and supervisors and companies actually have those health resources or access to them in the community where they can send women for competent menopause care. Those are sometimes tricky to find. And I will say that the Menopause Society, menopause.org, has a list of certified practitioners in menopause. And so if women are having trouble finding someone that's well educated in menopause, that's a good resource as well, because not all employee health providers are going to have that education. But I think it comes down to educating everyone. So even women need education on what's happening to them. And I think women need to understand where their resources are at work. Managers and supervisors need to be able to point the right direction and to be able to have a really good conversation with women if they wish to have it. And then finally, employers in general need to recognize that this is important, that it matters, that this could be actually a reason for the leaky leadership pipeline for women. Because we know that women drop out of this leadership pipeline along the way, and this could be one of those reasons. And if we could shore up and keep women in the workforce, it's good for women, but it's also really good for employers. This is a major source of human capital, and it's a major loss of human capital if we don't hold on to these very valuable employees.
Yeah. So it's real. It's very real. The implications are real, but the business outcomes and the upside is real as well if we can get this right. And
Right.
often when we work with organizations, some of our best clients, how we think about this is just what you said, Dr. Faubion, is awareness at the manager and the women leader level. And because when you have awareness, you can be much more understanding and practical. I think the second thing that underpins this is what we call psychological safety and
Hmm.
trust in the relationship between the manager and the women leader. And then the third thing is access to practical solutions. But I think that the hardest things is creating the awareness and creating the psychological safety, because organizations can put in all sorts of policies about things that are available, but if the women leader and their manager can't have that trusting conversation, authentic conversation, it becomes really tough to support them.
I agree entirely. So I think that's a key point. That's harder to teach, um, but that's a critical point.
Yeah. And I think how you teach it is a lot of listening on the manager's side, a lot
Right.
of educating themselves and getting access. And so even although your new book, The New Rules of Menopause, I would say that it's not just a guide for women, that it's an amazing resource for managers and an amazing resource for businesses. And anytime we're working with businesses, they're always asking the question, what about retention? How can
Mhm.
we stop the leaky pipeline? How can we, have people go the extra mile? They're always asking those questions, and largely they think it's down to compensation and benefits. And most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's down to the experience that women leaders and employees have in the workplace, and how does that fit into their life and into the way that they live their life.
That's exactly right. It's whether people feel valued in their jobs and in their work that is such a major factor in terms of satisfaction. So I think you're exactly right about that, and I think this is going to take a lot of effort over a long period of time, and we're going to have to figure out how to get it right. I had a very interesting meeting and participated in a roundtable with the U.S. Department of Labor Bureau of Women's Health, and they're very interested in this. So I think finally we're starting to get some traction in terms of, how do we help employers
Yes.
with this?
Yes, yes, yes. Because if we try and fix this one women leader at a time, it's not gonna make the difference. You sometimes use the metaphor of, if you're in Buffalo, New York, and it's snowing, and you're trying to dig yourself out of 6 or 8 feet of snow, it's going to take you a long time if you're using a shovel. If you have a snowplow and you're pushing it all forward, then you get out of it very quickly. And we think that part of the snowplow is getting to organizations,
Hmm.
um, getting to organizations to provide the resources, to provide the opportunity for learning about this for managers, and for creating that employee experience where women do feel valued.
Absolutely. I think
Yeah,
we can get there.
we can. I know we can. Dr. Faubion, it's been a pleasure. We are so excited to continue these conversations for our listeners. Please, you can buy Dr. Faubion's book anywhere that you can buy books. The New Rules of Menopause, a Mayo Clinic guide to perimenopause and beyond. Thank you, Dr. Faubion, and what a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.